My name is Alison Weatherby, and I'm the author of The Secrets Act, which is a young adult historical mystery that takes place during World War II at Bletchley Park.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the Secret Act and kind of what sparked the inspiration for it.
Mhm.
Um, Particularly, I'd love to know what came first. Was it kind of the historical and the setting that came first, or was it the kind of thriller slash mystery element? Because you've kind of balanced two elements you don't often immediately think of being together
Mhm.
so well. I'd love to know if one came before the other and how they kind of interlocked with each other.
Yeah, sure. So I think the setting came first, honestly, because I was visiting. So my sister lives over in England. I'm over here in Dublin, and I was visiting and just went to Bletchley as a tourist. And it's such. Have you been to the museum? It's
I
such a
haven't, no.
It is really, really cool. And I've learned a bunch of things in the museum so backing up a little bit, I've always written mysteries because I love mysteries and thrillers. And I had, before going to Bletchley, I'd written a young adult mystery. And for one reason or another, it ended up in a, drawer essentially. And I kind of was like, I'm not writing, I'm on a break. And then I went to Bletchley and they have all this information there, like in the beginning section. And one of the first things I learned was that during wartime, 75% of the people who worked there were young women, like 17 and up. And I thought, okay, well, this is fabulous. And then I started reading more about what they were doing there. And I was like, well, this is super cool. These super strong women. So that's kind of where the idea sparked. I wanted a book that had these super strong women in it. I always knew it was going to be a mystery because that's kind of my shtick. Like I love mysteries. Um, because I'm a total pantser, I didn't know what the mystery was going to be. And so that took longer than it should have. But that's sort of where the idea of it came from. I did a ton of research for this book, obviously. I did end up kind of stealing little snippets from various people's real lives to make the story what it is. It was fun.
Definitely. With obviously the Secret Acts centers on women kind of in wartime,
Mhm.
which isn't something you kind of see a lot of, I think, in especially in older fiction. I think a lot of it is men in wartime and the actual kind of is that something that you think drew you to it, the fact it was kind of telling this story that's perhaps not known as well or talked about as much?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hadn't, aside from The Imitation Game, which again is Alan Turing, I knew very little about Bletchley. Now, granted, I'm an American, so um, even even though I've lived over in Dublin for quite a bit, and I have exposure to the UK and history over there, but I had very little knowledge of what these women did, and it was a story that I thought I had to get out there, and especially for teens who I remember being a teen and in your math and science classes, and the boys are always the ones who are talking loudly and talking over you, and I just thought, no, this is a perfect example of how amazing and empowered these women were, and how strong they were, and you know they broke an unbreakable code. Like it's crazy, the stuff that they did, the long hours that they worked. Um it, it was very, I thought it would be very inspirational for girls to learn this, but also, I mean, for me, I thought it was a fabulous story that had to get out there.
Definitely. I mean, I've always grown up in the UK and it's not something I really was aware of. Like I knew Bletchley Park was a thing, but most of what I learned at school was kind of like the D-Day stuff and the kind of all that kind of side of war, not the kind of stuff that happened actually in our country and other places. I
Mhm.
think a lot of it was focused on the more war aspects. I think the most I kind of learned was women stayed at home and did factory jobs, and then because they did that, they got to do a few more things after the war than they did before. And I think that was the kind of basis of what I learned at school. So it was really incredible to see this kind of like other side, because I haven't watched The Imitation Game. So so it was kind of like my first introduction into it, and now I'm like, I must find out more. So how did you find it was to balance the kind of the mystery with the historical without going too, like, I imagine that's difficult because I imagine there was a lot that went into the research and you wanted to kind of implore that into the book, but without taking, I imagine it's difficult.
It was, and I was super insecure about the historical bits too, because I was just certain that some older British gentleman was going to come at me with his finger and say, you got this wrong, you know. And so I was so nervous about that. And I did so much research. I like at one point I was emailing with one of the researchers at Bletchley Park, and I was asking things like, were the desks metal or were they wooden? And he said to me, he was like, you need, I mean, he essentially said, you need to let this go. Like, we don't know, and just take a deep breath and walk away. And so I was like, okay, okay, because so much of the information was buried for decades, and a lot of it's, you know, gone. There are very few photographs of the place during the time. So and you know, by design, but so I wanted to fill all those historical gaps in that respect. But then in creating the mystery, I was very, very, very loyal to the historical bits. And my editor Kezia Lupo said at one point, she's like, you know, this is fiction. You have to let it be fiction. And I mean, she had to remind me many times. There was one point where we were sort of at a standoff about one thing, and I was like, you cannot, no, it's historically, it's not going to be like this. And she said, well, but and so that we had this three-way, because all of this was done during COVID. So we had this three-way Zoom, and it was her and Barry Cunningham. And at one point, Barry was like, okay, well, you know, and I mean, he was able to just suggest something else that I said, okay, fine, because he said, okay, fine. It was sort of, I mean, it was much more amicable than that, but I was very, like, there were certain things that you know, I don't know, I was very rigid with that. Now, I have learned that I don't need to be as rigid, and it's okay to kind of stray. And since then, I've talked to so many other historical writers who have fantastical elements and all sorts in there, and it's just, and they're just like, yeah, whatever, you know, just throw it around. And so I feel a little bit more relaxed. But writing that, I was so rigid. It was a bit much.
I love that, the idea that they're like just like, no,
Yeah.
historically.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know a little bit about your kind of research process. Like, obviously, you went to Bletchley Park. Was there like a lot of reading, or was it more kind of like visits and talks with people? And I'd also love to know what was the most interesting thing that you kind of discovered during your research.
Oh gosh. There were so many so many things that I learned during the research. And it's funny because you kind of go into these rabbit holes and you start going down. Like at one point, one of my characters eats a sandwich in a pub. And I can't tell you how many hours I researched, like, what would they be able to order at a pub? What kind of sandwich? What meat would be in that sandwich? You know, it was just stupid. But I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of like I went to Bletchley, and I also was very fortunate to have a friend of a friend who's a librarian at the Imperial War Museum. So I know. And I'm a huge nerd. So I love the Imperial War Museum anyway. And so they have these research rooms, and like anyone can go to them. They're really cool. And you request all these different documents, and they just sit on your desk. And so you can go through these people's like letters and diary. I mean, it's crazy. And you can, you know, see their handwriting, these
I
maps.
don't think I'd ever get a book written. Like, I'd just
I
be
know.
sat there going through everyone else's stuff.
I know. And so, and then the other thing is both the Imperial War Museum and Bletchley have these great oral histories. And so I spent hours listening to these people just to kind of get an idea of how they talked and what sort of words they used and that sort of stuff. And that was so valuable in building the characters. And it was really a good time. Now, the most interesting thing, I'm trying to think. I think honestly, like the whole process of how things worked at Bletchley, and how a radio transmit came to Bletchley and then came to the coders, and then the different process of all of that. That was fascinating, and I still can't entirely wrap my brain around how exactly some of it worked. So I feel like I spent a lot of time working on that and thinking that through. But there was an exhibit at Bletchley when I was there. And it was after I'd written a draft of the book and I'd gone back, and they had a huge exhibit on the dispatch riders. So Anthony and Richard are dispatch riders, and they ride their motorcycles and such. And that part was fascinating. The fact that they couldn't ride the same route twice, that there's no street signs, it's complete darkness. They often rode at night. It was so incredibly dangerous. And I spent the whole time, they had like a dummy with a big jacket on and all this stuff. And I was looking at him like, okay, he doesn't have a helmet there. And he's got I'm like looking for all these safety things. Like, this guy's going to kill himself. So I found that stuff really fascinating, all the training those guys went through. And they had, some of them had guns that they wore, but they did an enormous amount of training. It was so fascinating, all of it, honestly.
I'm a little bit jealous, I must admit, because it sounds like you had an incredible time. I'm surprised you ever got like the book written, because I think I'd have got stuck in that, just like going down all the different rabbit holes that kind of happen when you research things. Obviously with your book, you've kind of got two main protagonists. I was wondering if you wanted to tell us a little bit about them and how they kind of came to be and come into the book.
Sure. So Ellen's, I guess, one of the main characters, and she's I love Ellen. I love both of them, but Ellen's comes from Wales, and she's very book smart, and she has her way of doing things. She loves her puzzles, and she comes to Bletchley with an expectation of what she's going to be doing, even though she doesn't know what she's going to be doing, because the girls never knew what they were going to be doing before they went there. And she's thoroughly disappointed immediately. But she's super awkward, and she kind of reminds me a bit of myself in some respects, where you go into a new situation, it's kind of hard to make friends, and you'd rather be sitting with your book in the corner rather than mingling. And so I did, one of the things I wanted the book to be about friendship, because I saw through the research, it was all these girls coming to Bletchley, knowing nobody, not even know what they were going to do or any of that, and being separated from their families. So I thought it would be a good, fun friendship story. And then Pearl's great. Like, I love Pearl. She's actually based on a real life woman who worked at Bletchley. So the youngest person who worked at Bletchley was 14, and she was a messenger, just like Pearl at the beginning. But I wanted Pearl to be a complete contrast to Ellen, and she'd be super, super smart and love puzzles and everything, but she's also just a hot mess, right? She's just like, I just picture her hair being all over the place, and she's wearing her dad's jumper that's all like holy and dirty, and she doesn't care what people think of her. And she sounds like I think she would be a great person, but she's good for Ellen in many respects. I feel like they work very well together as friends. So it was a fun friendship to create between the two of them.
Definitely. Like, they're kind of the opposites attract, pull the best qualities out of each other kind of duo, and I love that about them. Obviously, The Secret Acts is a YA novel. Did you always have it in your head that it was going to be a YA novel? Is YA where you've always kind of seen your writing, like, from the very beginning?
Yeah, it is. I guess way back when I was like just out of university, I tried to write short stories for, adults. And that was, I think everybody has that like pretentious moment where they're out of university and they think like there's no market for short stories. I don't know what I was thinking, but that was what I wanted to do. And I was living in New York City at the time, so it felt appropriate. It was a big failure, but I love writing for children. But young adult is so fun. Like you can have, I feel like I mean, you can have fun writing middle grade, agreed. But I feel like with young adult, teens are in such a weird stage. There's so much that you can play with there. And for this book, it just made sense. I mean, they were young women working at Bletchley. It seemed like the perfect age group there. But in general, I love writing YA. It's probably where I will stay.
And do you think historical fiction is something that you're gonna like focus more in on the in the future? Slash, what are you working on? If you can tell us. I mean, if you have any secrets you'd like to drop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, historical, yes, it's a bit of a shift, this next book. It is historical. Considering, I guess 1989 is historical. So that's when it's set in 1989. So obviously a lot more modern. But it is a mystery, murder mystery as well. So, and it's set in New Jersey, actually. So, yeah, it's a little, it's rougher, not rougher, but it's a little, it's not as tame as The Secrets Act. But I had so much fun writing it.
I'm so excited. It's not as tame. There's so many thoughts going through my brain now that I'm just like, I need it.
I know. Well, I mean, I have a playlist for this book. Like it was so much fun to put together. With all of not saying The Secrets Act wasn't. I loved The Secrets Act, but this book was much more of my heart. There's, just the fashion, the music, all of the pop culture of the 80s. It was a good ride. It was a really fun time.
I can imagine, like, that is a time period that is always, pardon me, thought of as being really fun. So I can imagine like setting anything in that kind of time period. It's just like so much fun to write. I suppose one of the last things I'm going to ask you is if, obviously, readers all take different things away from books, but what is one thing that you hope that kind of readers of The Secret Act would take away from it, if anything?
I feel one of the things that I would like people and young girls especially to think about is that they can do anything, and when put in any situation, they really can achieve anything. And these women were amazing, the stuff that they did, and the hard long hours they put in, not even really knowing what the end goal was, because of the Official Secrets Act. They didn't know so many things about what their project was, and I just feel like if they could do this during a war, like, we can do anything. We can become computer scientists if we want to. We can become, like, it's don't let anything stop you. And that's I hope, I mean, aside from the murder mystery bit, that's just fun and all that, I hope that young people will read this book and come away with that message.
I definitely think they will. I think that's one of the reasons I love YA so much, is that there's always a kind of message behind it, even no matter how entertaining or murderous a book may be. There's always there's just something about YA, I think.
Yeah.
But before we go, do you have any other UKYA books that you would recommend?
So many. So
I've got a shelf.
I know. Oh, convenient. It's right behind me. Well, I am going to Ashlyn O'Loughlin's launch tonight for Big Bad Me, and that is, I love that book. It's so much fun. Such a fun book.
It is the next book on my TBR. I am so excited for it.
It's so much fun. It is just such a fun romp.
It looks so much fun. Like, everything I've heard about it, it's just like, I just feel like it's the perfect book to read at the moment anyway. Yes, but like, yes. I just feel like I'm gonna
you will love it. It is laugh out loud funny. It is great. Love that book. I also, let's see, I mean, Ben Oliver's The Loop trilogy is like, I don't like science fiction, but I love those books so much. Those have been so much fun. And Morgan's The Girl with No Soul is also, I cannot wait for her second one. I know she probably can wait for a second one.
Yeah. It's that book, like I read it and it was one of those ones that I just sat with for a while afterwards.
No,
Like
I know.
my partner came in like after I'd finished reading it, was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just yeah."
Just need to be with these people for a while. Just let me be here. I
I don't
know.
want to leave them.
I know.
It was one of those books where I was like, no, I really need to just like get these
Mhm.
characters and then bring them into the real world. I suppose actually that makes me think of another question.
Uh-huh.
If you could bring any one of your characters out of the book for the day to spend kind of a day with, who would it be?
Oh, that is a tough one. That is tough. That's really hard. I mean, obviously, none of the bad guys. I would love them where they are. Um, it's a toss up, honestly. Like I absolutely, and poor Richard. I loved poor Richard. And I think I would love on one hand to have Richard, just some more time with Richard, because I feel like he got the short end of the stick. And he's such a good guy, and I feel like there's a lot to him. But probably of the two main characters, it would have to be Pearl, because I think she would be a good time. I think she would be a lot of fun, and
Definitely.
she might be a little rough around the edges and not exactly nice to me at times, but I think she would be really fun.
She definitely like show you a good time.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. And she would tell me everything that she knows. And yeah, I mean, she's very straightforward. It would be great.
definitely. Well, thank you so much for kind of talking to me today.